Hello, everyone. Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 123rd episode of the Writ Podcast. It's budget week, but we already have a pretty good idea since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has spent the last few weeks announcing what is going to be in the budget. So we'll see what's going to happen when it actually comes out later next week. What's behind the strategy of the Liberals to leak out elements of the budget ahead of time? We also saw a trio of NDP incumbents decide not to run again for the next election. So we'll discuss a little bit on where things stand for the New Democratic Party right now. So the pollsters, the party pollsters, political pollsters are back to chat about it all this week. Dan Arnold is Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara and worked as Director of Research and Advertising in the Prime Minister's office and polled for the Trudeau Liberals in each of the past three federal elections. Andrew Enns is Executive Vice President at Léger. He polled for the federal Conservatives during the Harper years and has polled for provincial Conservative parties across Canada. And James Valkey is Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints Research and has worked on many central campaigns for the NDP, including their 2011 breakthrough. Dan, Andrew, James, good to have you all back.
Nice to be here.
Good to be back. Great to be here.
So I do want to start with the budget, which is next week. Usually you only talk about a budget after the budget comes out, but we can talk a lot about what's happening already. Over the last few weeks, it's been a bit of a drumbeat, almost an announcement a day from Justin Trudeau. We got a renter's bill of rights. We got national school food program, more money for childcare, housing, AI, national defense. It's been a lot. We usually don't have this. We don't actually see it usually from the federal government, at least. Dan, you've polled for the government before in terms of budget awareness and all that kind of stuff. What is behind this strategy?
Yeah, so I think this makes a lot of sense. The biggest problem with budgets, as you said, is we don't usually talk about the budget till afterwards, and then, maybe for a day or two, and then it disappears. We would always, in government, and you can find this stuff, it's all publicly disclosed after the fact, but the government does awareness polls on the budget afterwards, and, you've probably got 40% or so of people who say they've heard about the budget, but then you ask them about, what did you hear about? And individual measures in there get 4%, 5% maybe for the best one, and then virtually nothing else gets any kind of registry there. I think the challenge is very much the analogy I've used before is it's kind of like Christmas morning, and if you've got a kid, you buy them 30 presents, and they're all excited, and they're opening them up, but then by the end of the day, all the presents are in the corner, and maybe there's one thing they're playing with, or they're just playing with the wrapping paper in the box, because you just give them too much, and people are just overloaded, and if you've given them the same presents, 1 week at a time throughout the entire year, every present would have been amazing, right? And I think, for the budget, something like the school lunch program, which isn't a ton of money, probably would have gotten completely buried and maybe been a footnote in a story, whereas here it got a few days of discussion. And people can scrutinize these things for good or bad and criticize them, but at least the Liberals are driving the agenda right now. And, essentially they're running an election campaign where nobody else is making announcements. So that's giving them an opportunity to actually get these news stories out here, as opposed to just dumping them all at once and having people distracted by wrapping paper and whatever else they're looking at.
30 presents for a kid. This does sound like the Liberal government. Andrew, what do you think of these measures, or at least the strategy?
Well, look, for sure, I agree with Dan that I think that there was an effort probably a few months ago to say, like, we have to figure out how we can get a fairly clean run as government in terms of some messaging, because it's proven, I would say, for the past year, a real challenge for the government to actually have a good clean run of being able to drive and dictate kind of the message and the news coverage for any prolonged period. So there's a lot of build up to the budget. I sort of smiled a bit when you talked about, sort of the leaking of the budget. I mean, I would hardly say that we're leaking budget details here in terms of things. It's quite deliberate. I think, and they're getting sort of those clean shots and certainly some good coverage. I still think there's, the challenge is going to be, regardless of whether they're on one day and you get those sort of couple of days after, or the fact we've had sort of 2 weeks, I think there's still going to be sort of a post-budget take stock of what have we done here? Have we accomplished anything really meaningful? And And the sort of the challenge a bit of the one a day, particularly I think in the housing. There's been a lot of a lot of focus on housing. Um, it can start to look a little jumbled for people, and you get a lot of different messages, and you get a lot of things coming in from different quarters that are going to impact, I think, public opinion. Premiers weigh in on jurisdictional stuff. You've got different comments from mayors and municipalities on things. So that there is a bit of a risk there, and I think in some of that you're going to have probably a bit of that problem after the fact in terms of how the public perceives this. Does it change? Because I think, realistically, this is all about trying to change opinions in the next within the next year. And so that's going to be sort of the litmus test as we get sort of 3 to 4 months out from now. Is do people feel the housing situation is on a path to correction, and we're confident that, hey, these guys have got something here. I don't know if we're there yet on this, but this is sort of I would say the goal, I would imagine.
James, what do you think about this rollout strategy?
Yeah, I would say the numbers I've seen echo similarly to what Dan has said about saliency, about recall on specific policies at a provincial level. I think that the government's it makes sense to do what they're doing. Like Andrew said, they're trying to take back a bit of a narrative, get back in the driver's seat after what has felt like a little bit of kind of loose on the rails, as it were. I think that it's smart, like Dan had said, to bring in those policies, get some extra days of work out of them. Over the last decade or so, budgets have become less important to people in that the post-budget strategy that people used 15 years ago are not what they use today. And I think that they're trying to reinvent that. By doing so, they're kind of, there's a parliamentary convention about secrecy of the budget, and the insiders are moaning and crying about, oh, this is all supposed to be for the lockup, and I'm supposed to know before everybody else. Canadians don't give a crap, really. So to a certain degree, they're taking advantage of that fact, and they're stringing this into a series of good news announcements, marking themselves on policy that they can now test over the next year and see where they stand for the next budget, which positions them for the election. So all that to say is I think it's a good strategy. But on that secrecy point, they're also playing with fire a little bit, right? Like if they start getting a little in front of their skis about things they're announcing outside of the budget announcement timeframe on policy issues, we've seen that in the past become an issue of leaked information. So I think that what they're doing makes sense. I think it'll be a strategy that's emulated by other provincial governments and federal governments going forward. And if they can get some good news out of it with not much critique from the opposition or alternate policy announcements or proposals, I think it's a win for them.
Dan, James mentioned, budgets, whether they matter that much. When I was working in the bureau, the budget day is this huge day. The whole place would empty out because I wouldn't go into the lockup, but others would. And it's this huge focus. Everybody's talking about it. You have all these interest groups, all these various, stakeholders have opinions that come out. They say what they think about it. But to the average voter, does a budget really matter? Does it move public opinion?
I mean, it's an event, as any government announcement would be. So it's a communications opportunity. But if you think of the scope of the budget and the billions that you're spending, does it get you a lot more than a smaller, well-crafted, interesting announcement would in the middle of October? Not always. Especially if people end up just talking about the deficit figure afterwards, or the other kind of contextual things as opposed to the measures themselves in them. Top of mind awareness again on government polling. If you ask people, what have you heard lately from the government in terms of things they've done? Yes, the budget will pop up there, but not more so than the ban on single-use plastics did, or other kind of high-profile announcements or one-offs. Certainly less so than the India trip or SNC-Lavalin or things like that, right? So, I think it's something that certainly gets noticed, but probably the more relevant long-term impact is on, what the budget actually does over time. If the Liberals are trying to solve the housing situation, are they actually putting forward measures that will make a difference and will get noticed over time as people sign up for these programs and take advantage of them? What's the impact of them going to be? So, ideally, you're doing things that are going to set yourself up either by giving you some success stories later on to talk about, or actually solving problems that you're trying to solve in the short term. Because as an actual event or news story, yeah, it's big, but it's maybe not even the top 5 things over the course of the year that the public's going to notice that the government does.
There's
Andrew,
also a chance.
James,
There's
go
also a
ahead, sure.
chance that there might be a counter narrative when the budget actually comes out, and it won't be about the programs and the spending. They might actually take we are in charge of the fiscal purse strings, and we are good economic managers. So to a certain degree, they might be getting the programmatic stuff out of the way now, and they might try to test. I know what Andrew's going to say.
Who are you suggesting is going to say that? James, please.
What I'm saying is they might try to bring a couple narratives out of the budget that they can then go to research and test and see which of those narratives are salient with people over the summer and see, get a sense of where they sit on that spectrum. Sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
No, I think Dan's right. I will differ a little and say that I think it's the context of budgets too, where the situational timing of budgets can actually have more of an impact on public. Like I look at the first budgets of a new government. Those can be sort of pace setters or agenda setter documents that, if they get it right, it can help a government propel it sort of, maybe out of the honeymoon, but in a clear agenda, and you can ride that for a bit. And that budget will have, I would say, impact on public impressions. Likewise, I mean, and this government is in that territory. It's nearing the end of a mandate here. They've got one potentially, one more budget, which would be, even heightened. But this budget there's going to be a lens on it saying, have they figured this out? Have they got things under control? Like, I think there'll be those kind of questions, not just from media or the opposition barking about terms of what they think they have or have not under control, but even stakeholders will want to look at that through the lens of saying, have they sorted this out in terms of, there's been no shortage of narrative that the government hasn't been, as James said, has been loose on the rails in terms of some execution and some of the policy and direction. And have they got this back in check? In sort of a state where some would like it to be. So I think those are where budgets can have a bit more impact on public opinion. More broadly, not necessarily on a specific item necessarily.
Dan, on what we know so far, there will be other stuff in the budget itself, but from what we know so far, what are the Liberals trying to do with the measures that they're putting forward, and is it going to work?
Well, I think there seems to be a lot of signals that this is going to be an overall story around housing that they're going to try to tell on Budget Day, specifically to help younger Canadians. There's been direct leaks that say this is a budget that's going to be designed for Gen Z and millennials. And I'd imagine that, what they'll be trying to reinforce coming out of the budget is that they are taking action on what is seen to be a big priority. I think all the pollsters here would agree that, housing always pops among the top 2 or 3 issues overall, and certainly among people under 40 or even under 50, probably number 1 or number 2 on most lists there. So I think they're responsive to an issue that there's a lot of concern about out there, trying to win back, I think, younger voters who over time have moved away from the Liberal Party. You look back at 2015, I know some people have this perception that like in 90% of young people vote for Liberal. It wasn't that situation, but it was our strongest vote demo back in 2015. By 2019, it kind of moved down to being an average vote demo. By 2021, was actually our worst group, was 18 to 34-year-olds. And it seems like since then, if anything, you look at some of the polling Pollara has done around just levels of anger and frustration around the economy that I've seen, and young people are very worked up about the housing market, about the economy. So, things may have gotten even worse with a lot of younger men drifting conservative, younger women kind of parking with the NDP. So I think they are trying to reconnect with younger voters to middle-aged voters who are frustrated on the housing file. Will it work? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. It seems like the polling environment's been pretty stable over the last couple of months. I don't know if this would be enough to actually shake that up, but ultimately the Liberals would be looking to at least give themselves a bit of a story to tell over the next 5 or 6 months, and hope that story can get some traction and start a bit of a comeback for them.
James, first of all, what do you think the Liberals are trying to do with this? But also from the NDP's perspective, they're going to be supporting the budget. We already know that from the agreement that they have with the government. What do they do with what's coming forward?
Yeah, I think so. To my mind, I think the big one of the big deciding items here is what Andrew and Dan have mentioned, right? It's the housing thing. That seems to be this people, if we're talking demographics, people under the age of 40 or 45 or 50, housing is one of their top concerns. Like we just did a survey that was released with the Broadbent Institute and the Frederick Ebert stuffing, and it showed like that it is a top issue for them. It's at a crisis. People are, they blame the government for the current housing conditions, and they expect the federal government to step in. Like that is who they think should be at the wheel, at the tiller. And I think when we're talking about big ticket issues that are going to carry over for the next year, housing is one of those things. It's like it's described as like a cargo ship. You can't turn it on a dime. It takes a lot of work. And I think when we're talking about big ticket items, that's going to be one of the things that people will judge this government according to it. Some people, the Prime Minister made the mistake of saying it's frankly not my jurisdiction, but that doesn't fly with Canadians. I don't know what announcements they'll have in the budget for it, but I expect it to be one of the most salient issues, especially in those hotly contested ridings over the next year and a half. And this budget will be a bit of an indicator as to how the parties are going to fall out on that. I'm going to say Poilievre is very good at contrasting himself with Justin Trudeau, like so good at that. But he needs to start putting solutions in the window, and especially on things that people care about a lot. He can't ride this change narrative up until the next election campaign. This budget's going to present, like housing, I think will be one of those things that echoes out of this budget if it's a big enough announcement that they can move things. But they may feel like they've already made those announcements and this budget doesn't do anything new either. I'm not sure. My suspicion is that's going to be the big takeaway narrative from this. It's not the food or the food program for kids. It's going to be housing. It's going to be those Gen Zs that are struggling in the marketplace to get their foot into the friggin' door and are frustrated and PO'd. And yeah, they may have been on board with Trudeau in 2015, but they're like, what have you done for me lately? And we're getting a lot of that feedback being like, this is where we are. I hear good things. I hear denial, but this is my life experience. And it's hard to deny that. And I don't know if they can move the chains on housing, it might be a big opportunity for them.
Andrew, from what has been announced, are there opportunities, are there vulnerabilities from the Conservative perspective they can work with?
Well, look, I'm not a housing market specialist. I actually sat with somebody having dinner on the weekend, and he's in building houses. He's in the trade, small company, builds residential houses. I asked him about like what is some. It's pretty complicated stuff, and it's a lot of municipalities, and it's a lot of zoning change. So I don't know. I'm with Dan. Like I think this just provides a good narrative. It's a narrative that you could weave together and say this is what we're doing, and keep going at it over time. Maybe I would be quite like, I think the interesting opportunity for the government, although not without some peril, is if they actually go in and change the mortgage terms, go from 25 to 40 years. I think that has an actual real dollar impact on those. It doesn't change the market price of anything, but it does make things more affordable in terms of a monthly mortgage. But there's peril to that. I mean, we tried it before and we went away from it, I think, for probably some good reasons. But I think if they were to do something like that, that actually puts Poilievre in a little bit of an awkward spot, because I think the economist side of some of the advisors would say, or the financial, side, the risk side would say this is dangerous. But the practicality side of it is this is how you make things more affordable. I mean, you just drag it out, and
Yeah.
so there's still some potential things that actually, because I think that is ultimately still when it comes down to the voters in the next year and changing their impression. James said it right. Like in 2015, the Liberals were elected to make the middle class better off. The young people, middle class, were going to be better off, and a large percentage of them are going, we're not. We're not. This is not going well. And how, in housing, those trying to get in, those trying to rent, they're all feeling that things aren't better off for me now. And certainly for those who are older are looking at their kids going, it's going to be impossible for them. Like, how are they going to do it? And I think you need to somehow in shorter term have some demonstrable impact that things, at least show some real signs that things are going to get better with a continued liberal government. And maybe you start to move some vote, because I think the opposition are certainly going to point that out and saying, you were promised better in 2015 and you're not getting it in 2023, 24, 25. And I think that's still that rub that they have to somehow figure out how to square.
James, child care funding, dental care, pharmacare, part of the the packages that we've seen over the last little while. These announcements include housing, which delve into municipal kind of stuff. We see the food care program, which delves into provincial jurisdiction. Does anybody care about that kind of stuff?
Well, people who they impact care a lot about that stuff, and I think the longer this government goes on, the more people that access some of those programs, they will be convinced about the value of them and the value of sustaining them and the risk in cutting them, right? Like, that's another thing. For New Democrats, they should be doing victory laps on all of these things that they have received credit for as part of the agreement, that they forced the Liberals, or that they'd like to say they forced Justin Trudeau to deliver on their behalf. Without the New Democrats, these things would not have come to fruition. For them, it's an important narrative to push and get out the door. For Canadians, it's really difficult to tell. Trying to get a pulse on the sentiment right now is hard, in that we're in between this, we're in the echo of hopefully the worst of the inflationary section. So there's a bit more of a concern about costs of things to them, of things to the government, of things that they're paying for. People feel that life is getting harder and more expensive, period. And though how that's going to fall out is different. Whereas after COVID, there was a sense that the government could make these things happen. And I think that sentiment we'll see where it lands in the next 6 months. But it certainly feels like some things might be shifting. And I think for a lot of people, they hold those programs, the social policy, the social safety net very dearly. And while they're open to a lot of things, they also do not want things taken off that they feel like they're entitled to. CPP, EI, public health care, right? Like, there's a lot of flags for people who think that slashing and burning a budget is a good idea. Like, Canadians hold those things very close to their hearts.
Dan, we've seen, the Prime Minister has said he's going to go over the heads of premiers if they're not delivering these kinds of programs, going directly to the municipalities, putting forward programs that the provinces need to buy in to get some of these things. How does that play out for the Liberals if they are in disagreements with provincial premiers over jurisdictional issues? What's the strategy there for the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I mean, he got a ton of flack last year, rightly, for saying it's not a federal jurisdiction, and now people seem to be upset that he's trying to make it a federal jurisdiction.
Poor guy. I hope he's okay.
I think so. Pollara actually did some polling recently. We do a syndicated study among the 4 Western Canadian provinces twice a year, and these are places where you would think people will be a bit more sensitive to provincial jurisdictions than, say, Ontario, where they kind of see themselves as Canada de facto. But we ask people, for different issues, do you think this is something that should be primarily a federal responsibility, primarily provincial, or both levels working together? And on building roads and schools, people do tend to lean a bit more on the provincial side of things, but on most issues, including housing, the majority of people say they want to see both levels of government working together. 60% of people across the 4 western provinces, and the majority, including majority in Alberta, majority in Saskatchewan, not places that love Trudeau, they want to see both levels of government working together on the housing file. So, the premiers can fight, but then it looks like they're the ones that are the roadblocks to getting it done, as Doug Ford would like to paint himself as being on the side of getting it done. If it looks like the premiers are the ones who are not getting it done, and the federal Liberals are actually trying to get things built, that's marks for them. And I think on this issue, it seems unlikely, that the Liberals are going to solve the housing crisis in a year, and that everyone's going to have an affordable house and everyone's going to be happy. So, the best you're going to do is get marks for effort and at least show that you are trying and making an effort to respond to the challenges people are feeling. So if there's a fight and it looks like the side of the fight that Trudeau's on is that he's the guy who's trying to get houses built, it's great. No problems there.
Andrew, most of these premiers that Trudeau's saying is not getting it done, Doug Ford, Daniel Smith, Scott Moe, Blaine Higgs, how is that a good thing or a bad thing for Pierre Poilievre?
Well, a couple things. One, I don't really think this is really about any jurisdiction or anything. Canadians, don't really care. I think Dan's bang on. It's just about, they roll their eyes when they see this stuff. But I think it is interesting that provincial premiers and parties have successfully over decades mounted campaigns against the federal government on various issues and on various topics. Running against the guys in Ottawa, depending on situations, is often a surefire way to get some votes in your province in a provincial election. What we're seeing here is, I think you've got a prime minister who's kind of deliberately running against some premiers, poking the bear, going in very deliberately with policies that there's no one in PCO or in FevProv relations is not putting their hand up at the table going, this is not going to be taken well. Yeah, we're fine. And I think, when I look at the relationship with Daniel Smith and the Prime Minister, they're at odds, and it's not an effort to gain votes in Alberta for the Liberal Party of Canada. It's an effort to gain votes in Ontario for the Liberal Party of Canada by fighting somebody that is perceived by, I would suspect, many Ontarians as a little bit extreme, a little bit too far right of center. And so I think this is sort of good politics. Plus, most of those premiers and increasing number of premiers are conservative. So it puts Mr. Poilievre a bit off, on a back foot in terms of how do you respond? How do you go in? So far he's taken the, kind of that, Feds should mind their own business and the provinces should mind their business. But as Dan said, when it comes to some issues like housing and even things like healthcare and services, as James talked about earlier, you got to be a little careful, because Canadians don't care who's providing the service necessary. They want, stuff being done. And the federal government's doing some things that a large number of Canadians think is a good thing. They're not going to necessarily, side with the premier who says, none of your business. So I think it's a good strategy. I think it's a strategy based on driving vote, and because and also being able to sort of point to to push back on a narrative that this government hasn't been great at getting things done. I think that's a bit of a knock of the last 4 or 5 years on the Liberal government, that we see a bit coming through, that reconciliation doesn't seem to be lots of talk, not as much action on that. And housing, we saw that. So if you've got this other narrative that says, here I'm trying and I'm running into these roadblocks, it helps a bit on that. But I think it's like there's a lot of politics on this one as opposed to pure jurisdictional policy maneuvering.
The conservative premier gatekeepers, one would say.
Love it.
We'll see if Pierre Poilievre agrees with James on that one at some point in the future. I did want to talk about one other thing before we close up, which was the news this past week that there was 3 veteran MPs for the New Democrats, Charlie Angus, Carol Hughes, and Rachel Blaney, who have announced that they're not running for re-election in the next campaign. Now, some of them, Hughes and Angus, have been around for a long time, so it's not necessarily a sign that they're trying to get out of the way because they think they're going to lose. But regardless of what their motivations were, it is going to have an impact on the NDP in these ridings, these regions of the country where the Conservatives are targeting them. James, what's the upside, I suppose, for the NDP, if there is any?
The upside is they got all 3 of the announcements out in a day. The downside of this kind of stuff is it can drag out, it can go on. And to be perfectly honest, the sun rises, the sun sets, time marches on. Carolyn Bennett's not seeking re-election. Aaron O'Toole ran away as fast as they kicked him out as a leader. This happens in politics, and Charlie and Carol have been stalwarts of Northern Ontario. They have taken the brunt of Conservative tax. And it was in 2011, Candice Bergen was sent to tromp through Northern Ontario and hold long gun registry town halls in NDP ridings and beat them to death. And that didn't quite turn out as they anticipated. The NDP had their best showing in the election, right? It was rejected. So there's a lot of shorthand that goes into this means that for Jagmeet, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. It's at North Island Powell River, which is Rachel Blaney, that's basically a day and a half of travel to get home. This stuff, it wears on you. It takes a lot of time and energy to move back and forth to and from constituencies. I chalk it up to the regular churn of politics. But it is a loss of voices in the party, right? Charlie is a strong, prominent voice, New Democrats. Carol has been a strong voice for Northern Ontario. But like I said, these ridings are replete with other strong voices. And even when Justin Trudeau, when Stephen Harper got his majority in 2011, NDP got majority of the Northern Ontario seats, right? When Justin Trudeau got his majority in 2015, the NDP had breakthroughs in Essex, Ontario, and Saskatoon and Regina. It's for the blue-orange ridings. There's a few other dynamics at play that don't always align with a single national narrative. It's a hard one to decipher. I don't want to say it's a case-by-case basis, but the regions in those are so different than some of the urban regions that it's difficult to say this means this means this means this. But yeah, it's a loss of powerful voices from the caucus. But hopefully, this election's all about change, and there'll be a lot of exciting new voices to take their place.
And new blood. That's always the best part when an incumbent retires. Not that the seat.
We use that a lot. We use that a lot in Manitoba, and look where that got us.
Yeah. Apologies if you're hearing anything. It's decided that the city decides to sweep my street just as I'm recording the podcast.
That's okay.
Dan, broadly speaking, what's the state of the NDP right now? They have a lot of the caucus that isn't going to be running again. Again, a lot of them just because they've been there for a long time. Some have been there for less. What's from your perspective? How are things setting up for the NDP? How are they positioning themselves ahead of the next election?
Yeah, I think the incumbents leaving, I don't know if it's a sign of something bigger. I do agree with what you wrote on the Writ, Eric, this week, that NDP incumbents over the years when I've been doing riding surveys and have done analysis tend to have a bigger impact than incumbencies for other parties. So, losing someone like a Charlie Angus, I think that's more than the usual 2, 3, 4 points you would give a party because of the incumbent. That seems like something that actually could make a big difference locally, especially in a more rural riding. And I've seen over the years just doing polling in the provincial scene in Northern Ontario, incumbency up there seems to have a big impact on a lot of those ridings as well too. So, I do think that's something that, from a purely mathematical perspective, maybe it's not a sign of something bigger, but 1, 2, 3 seats at the end of the day could be a difference when you start doing the calculus.
Mhm.
The NDP, I think the challenge that they seem faced with right now is that the Liberals are, well, let's be honest, not doing great. But the NDP aren't the ones picking up the marbles, and we've been in an environment for the past at least 10 years where there've been a lot of Liberal NDP switchers out there. But for whatever reason, even dissatisfaction with the Liberals hasn't really bled over to the NDP. So I think there's an identity right now around Singh of being very kind of urban NDP, and the Charlie Anguses of the world that are seen as more as the blue collar rural NDP types. Those are the types of people and the types of voters that already I think maybe have some doubts about Singh, and holding on to some of those ridings outside of the downtown Torontos, Vancouvers of the world. It becomes more difficult if you don't have some of those local voices to connect with those voters, when Singh seems to not be the guy who is connecting with them the same way that a lot of past NDP leaders have been able to connect outside of the downtown latte Starbucks NDP crowd.
Andrew, the Conservatives must be looking at this. I mean, they would have already been targeting these ridings, but they must be happy to see NDP incumbents retiring in Vancouver Island and the north part of it, so far away from Victoria, and in Northern Ontario. These are seats that they are hoping. These are orange and blue fights, but they'll end up being blue on election night.
Yeah, for sure. I think many of these seats were, on the radar, I suspect, for the party. Look, a couple things. First, just generally, the last number of national polls has the NDP tracking, under 20%, which I think that's a bit disconcerting, as Dan said, and the Liberals aren't necessarily tracking up in any way. So I think, when you're in an environment, like if the election were a month from now, I think the Liberals and the NDP would be hard pressed in terms of their vote gathering, and they'd be looking hard for vote. And so when you don't have an incumbent who knows, where to go to find that vote, and when you're really looking hard for it, that's always a bit of a challenge. I will say that incumbency might be tempered just a little bit in this coming election because of boundary changes. You'd know better, Eric, in terms of, but I suspect there's a large percentage of ridings that 25% or more of the riding is changing, and that does level the playing field a little bit, depending on what's changing and how active that incumbent has been in terms of getting a bit more known outside of the riding boundaries. So there's a little bit of, I would say a buffer on some of those. I think one of those, I think Charlie's riding is multiplying, tenfold inside or something ridiculous. So now he's a well-known guy, and I think that's definitely a loss for the party. But certainly it's going to be interesting. I think, at the end of this, you still, when there's no incumbent, then you start really looking at who those candidates are, and can you find good candidates? And I think that's probably the other shoe to kind of watch for with the NDP. Like, can they recruit some good solid people to replace these individuals? I totally agree. I mean, a father who spent 37 years in the business of politics, it grinds on you, and the travel and all the rest of it, right? So I fully, especially those remote ridings, no one can appreciate the amount of travel you have to do. So, I get that. The timing's not super great. That would be the concern, I think, if you're Jagmeet Singh. I mean, and we haven't talked about it, but close to my home here is Elmwood Transcona. Daniel Blakey's that's a tough loss, and I suspect for him, I think there was grass is a little greener on the other side of the fence, pulled him away, as opposed to necessarily the travel potentially, and that those messages get picked up by a few of the followers. And can you find somebody caliber to replace? That's the those are the questions now. I mean, to what James said, look, the sun gets up in the morning. It's like, what are we doing about it?
All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. Dan, I know you loved the local by-elections, so I was really hoping to hear what you thought about the Newfoundland, Labrador, Fogo Island, Cape Friels vote coming up next week. So maybe you can save that for we'll talk about it soon.
glad you
We'll
didn't
do a
ask us to
special
spell it.
episode next week on that.
All right. Well, thanks so much. The budget will be out next week. We'll see if there's any new surprises in them. Everybody's all, of course, going to talk about whatever the deficit number is and that kind of thing. But certainly, we've been talking a lot about the budget in the run-up and probably more than we would have afterwards. So at the very least, the Liberals have succeeded in getting us to talk about these
We
things.
did not talk about the carbon tax once on this podcast.
That's right.
Eric. So
They're driving our narrative.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Mission accomplished. All right. Well, thanks so much to the three of you.
Excellent.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.